was a reason for Galante being killed that maybe a lot of people don't know. The Homicide Bureau of the DA's office was playing softball against the homicide squad of the police department that day. And I was in center field playing ball, and the other team was up, and I'm waiting, and I see all these cars now drive up to the field, and the guys who were in the other dugout, which were detectives, all milling around, and I see people starting to leave. So, and the guys now, my colleagues in the DA's office now start walking off the field. I'll get to the home plate, which is the center, or to the pitching mound, the center of the field. And I said to someone, "What the hell is going on?" And he said, "Carmine Galante just got killed on Knickerbocker Avenue." And then 2 days later, I'm involved in dealing with the Baldo Amato and Cesar Bonaventure's. This hearing was set up, and he talked his way into becoming one of the main witnesses in this hearing. And his testimony was heard by Rudy Giuliani, as well as this guy Louis Free, who became the head of the FBI. He was the prosecutor. They were doing the Pizza Connection case, and they used Luigi as one of the main witnesses in the Pizza Connection case. Now, during the Pizza Connection trial, he met a guy named Joe Pistone, who you might know, who was the person who was behind Donnie Brasco. They were calling him the most important mafia informant since Joe Valachi.
So do you think that there was corruption on the Italian authorities' part, or do you think that there was apprehension on their part because they might be targets of assassination?
So they cooked up this whole scheme and wound up killing John Paul I. This is the mentality of these guys. It's just unbelievable. I had a veal cutlet Parmesan hero and a beer waiting for him, and he talked and told me things that I didn't even know existed.
Michael Vecchione, part 2. How are you? Welcome back.
I'm good, Rob. Thanks very much for having me back. It's a pleasure.
No, it's a pleasure to have you here, Michael. Right, we covered quite a bit of ground, 2 hours worth in our part 1.
Yes, we did.
So I was just going to kick off where we were about to start when it ended.
Okay.
Which was your book, Homicide Is My Business, Luigi the Zip.
Gotcha. Be happy to talk.
Do you want to expand on that?
My man, Luigi. So let me tell you how I came to know Luigi. I was, at the time that I met him, I was the senior prosecutor in the Homicide Bureau in the DA's office, the Brooklyn DA's office. And it was the late 70s, maybe it was 1980, but I think it was more like 1978, 79. And it was a quiet day. I was, in the office, and I get a call from my boss. And actually, it was the deputy chief of the Homicide Bureau. My boss, the chief, was off on vacation. The deputy was in charge. His name was Marty Fogelson, who I knew very, very well. I had been working there for a long time. And my office was a very small office at the time, and I was right next to the boss's office, or his office. And he called me in, and he said, "Listen, there's 2 detectives here with somebody. I want you to interview him. He's an informant, and he's going to be yours." So I said, "Okay. Can I ask, why did you choose me?" So he says, "Well, you're Italian. He's Italian, and I thought maybe it would work out." And actually, he was very prescient. It worked out very well that way. So I go into my office. Actually, I went into the conference room because it was 2 detectives and Luigi. And I sat down and waited for them to get him and bring him into my office. And I had 2 of the DA's detectives. We had a squad of detectives who worked in the DA's office called detective investigators. And I had 2 of them with me in the office as well. And they bring in this guy. And I knew the 2 NYPD detectives. They were homicide detectives. I had worked with them in the past. They knew me. And they brought him in, said hello, introduced me to them. And I looked at this guy, and I said to myself, this can't be a hitman, because I was told that he was a Sicilian hitman. And so the guy looked like he was coming in to like empty the garbage pails. I mean, he was a little short guy, dressed terribly. And in my mind, you see The Godfather, and you see all these other movies, and hitmen supposed to be, certain way that they looked, and I said, this guy can't be. So he sat down. The two detectives, NYPD detectives, basically said, "Okay, Mike, he's yours," and they handed him off to me, and now it was me, my two detectives, and Luigi. Now the reason that they came in was, and I find this out, of course, in all during the time of my interviewing him, that Luigi was a hitman, and he was a hitman for the Bonanno crime family primarily, but he also did hits for the Gambinos. Um, and he had gotten into, I don't want to say a little bit of trouble, but he had a problem with the mob. He felt that they weren't living up to what he thought they should be, and I'll tell you about why he gets to Brooklyn in a bit. And um and he he turns down a hit by an international criminal who ultimately was involved in causing the death of Pope John Paul I, involved in the Vatican bank fiasco, etc. A guy by the name of Michele Sindona. He turns down Sindona, who wanted him, Luigi, to hit a prosecutor and a judge in Italy and a prosecutor in New York. And I'll tell you why in a second. And he turned him down. And during the course of my debriefing him, he tells me that he turned him down because he said, after I got to know him, we call on each other on a first name basis. He says, Mike, if I kill a prosecutor in New York, he said, my life is over. He said, and how am I going to go to Italy and kill someone in Italy? If I kill someone in New York, how am I going to get out of the country? And he said, I can't do that. So he told the Sindona no. And that didn't sit well. And he knew that that was a bad thing to do, but in his mind, he had to do it. So he had basically been, he had done something that he wanted Sindona's help, even though he had turned him down. He had gotten arrested and he needed bail money, and Sindona told him no. Luigi tells me later on, he says, I knew once I turned him down and he turned me down, my life was over. He was gonna kill me. So he gets arrested, Luigi. He's always looking for money. He sets up this crazy robbery in Queens, which is another part of New York City. And he was told that a courier, a money courier, would deliver money on a particular day to this location in Queens, and that it was usually about $30,000 that the courier he was bringing or picking up or bringing to this particular location. And he set it up with two friends of his. One drove him to the location, and there he was in his car, watching and waiting for this courier to show up. And once it was over, they were going to drive now to another friend's house in Queens and split the money up. So as Luigi's watching, the courier, sure enough, shows up, and he tells me, I look and I see it's not a man, it's a woman. The courier is a woman. He said, we in Sicily, he spoke in this broken English, we no kill no women, and we no rob no women in Sicily. He said, but I was stuck. I had to do it. So he does it. And instead of $30,000, there was about $3,000 or $4,000 in the bag. So he drives to his friend's house. Somebody must have seen it as it happened, because it happened right out on the street, on a very busy street in Queens, very business area. The cops must have followed his car, because when he got to his friend's house, the car was surrounded by cops. They were all arrested. He was brought to the Queens police precinct and then ultimately brought to the Queens House of Detention. I'm sorry, to the Queens Criminal Court, where he was awaiting arraignment. So he's arraigned, and at that time, this is how long ago it was, he was held on $500 bail. Now, things have changed in New York. Hardly anybody gets held on bail anymore. But from about the 80s to almost to the present time, $500 bail on an armed robbery was unheard of. But at that time, 500 was a good amount of money. So he didn't have it. He did the robbery because he didn't have any money. So what he does is he calls Sindona from jail and asks Sindona to put up the $500 bail for him. And he says to Sindona, look, you know, you got to help me. And I believe what he was trying to convey to Sindona was, I know what you wanted me to do. And if you don't do this and help me out, you know, I could very well go to the police and give you up. Sindona tells him essentially, and I'll use the language, go fuck yourself. He doesn't do it. Now he's stuck. He can't go. He says, I cannot go into jail, first of all, because Sindona will find me and he'll kill me. But second of all, I'm a Sicilian. I can never say that I wanted to rob a woman if I had to testify at a court. I had to get out of jail. I had to get the bail posted and I had to get out of the country. He ultimately gets his brother-in-law, his wife's brother, to put up the $500 bail, and he goes home. He calls Sindona from home now. This is a day or two later. And he asks him again. He says, I need your help. He says, I need $30,000. You get me out of the country and everything will be okay. And again, he drops the hint that, listen, if you don't help me out, I'm going to the cops. Sindona tells him basically, no. He told me, he said, I hung up the phone, I got my jacket, and I walked to the police precinct in Manhattan. He lived in Brooklyn, but he went to this police precinct in Manhattan, I think because he knew the area. It was not that far from Little Italy. And walked in, spoke to the desk officer and said, I need to talk to the FBI. They call FBI agents down, make a very long story short. FBI agents grab him, bring him, start debriefing him over several days. And during the course of the debriefing, he tells them and confesses to everything he did. Most of it was old and not easily found or easily solved in terms of murders. There's one that's open, and it's not that long before, and it was in Brooklyn. And the FBI completely debriefs him, brings him to the police precinct that covered the area where that murder took place, and turns him over to them and said, the guy is confessing to one of your murders. You can close it. And Luigi says, and they also tell the cops that, you know, he's cooperating. You might be able to use him for other cases. Now, the NYPD does not keep informants. They do not keep people. They do not, particularly guys in jail. I mean, they can't help them. They just always claim that they don't have the money to keep them in safe houses or anything of that nature. So what they do, they brought him to the DA's office. And they walk in, and these two guys, before I got involved, said to my boss, just what I told you. This guy has an open case in Brooklyn. He's willing to, he's already confessed to it. He's got other information. You might want to debrief him, etc. And that's how I got into the case. And when he sits down that first day, he looked horrible, Rob. I mean, he looked terrible. And I said to him, are you hungry? It was probably around maybe 1 o'clock in the afternoon, 2 o'clock, something of that nature, or maybe a little earlier. Maybe it was before noon. I said, you hungry? He said, yes. First of all, he asked me, I introduced myself, of course. And when he heard my last name, I could see the smile on his face. He realized that, you know, all right, it's an Italian I can speak to. And he asked me if where my family came from in Italy, and I told him Naples and southern Italy. Now he came from Catania, Sicily, and if you look at the map, Catania, and I'll tell you the story in a minute. Catania is not that far. It's a ferry that leaves from Catania and goes to Naples. So he was happy. He was happy that he was with me. When I asked him if he was hungry, he said, yeah. He said, the only thing they served me he said, what they served me in the Brooklyn House of Detention is merda, which is shit in Italian. That's the word for shit. So I said, what do you want? He said, I want a veal cutlet Parmesan hero and a beer. So one of the detectives who was with me, I sent him down to this restaurant not that far from the office, got the veal cutlet Parmesan hero and the beer. That was it, Rob. He was my friend for the entire 3, 4, 5, 6 months that he was with me. And every time he came in, I had a veal cutlet Parmesan hero and a beer waiting for him. And he talked and talked and talked and told me things that I didn't even know existed. Things about, you know, I was a homicide prosecutor, not a rackets prosecutor at that point. So, you know, I had done a very big mob case as a murder case several months before, maybe even a couple of years before that. But he was telling me things, particularly about the Sicilian mafia, that was interesting. I love that history and I love that stuff. I just like that, the idea of knowing all of that, because I always wanted to become what I ultimately became, which was a rackets prosecutor. So he's happy as hell, and he talks to me about everything. And so I had to start by asking him, and I told him right up front, I said, listen, if you want my help with this homicide case, which carries 25 years to life, by the way, and he's confessed to it already, and it was a case that could be easily proven with his confession. I said, if you want my help, you're gonna have to tell me everything I ask you, everything you know, everything that you think is important to me, things that I may not even be looking at, I need to know about. So says, no problem. And he did. And he did. And so I asked him first of all, about his life in Catania, and how he got into the life, which is what the wise guys call being involved in the mafia. So he tells me that he gives me a great line. He says, and he later gives this line when he testifies years later to President Ronald Reagan's Commission on Organized Crime. He had a Senate commission that was set up to investigate organized crime, all different topics in organized crime. And Luigi winds up being one of the star witnesses. He later tells the senator what I'm about to tell you. He said to me, when I asked him how he got into the life, he said, Mike, in America, little boys want to be baseball players. In Sicily, little boys want to be mafia. And that's how and why he wanted to get into the life, into the mafia in Sicily. Now, he was in Catania, which is not the center of the mafia in Sicily. Palermo is, which is the capital, but there is a mafia contingent. And the guy who was in charge of the mafia in Catania, where Luigi always called him Signore Rapisardi. He never gave me his first name. He was still kind of honored to talk about this guy and respected him. So he called him Signore Rapisardi. And as Luigi was growing up, he realized that, or knew that, Rapisardi was the guy who he had to go to if he was going to fulfill his dream of becoming a made man, a Sicilian made Sicilian mafiosi. And Rapisardi had a social club / coffee shop in Catania, and Luigi sort of hung around. And I'm telling you this for a reason. Hung around and outside and watched things until he finally got the guts to go in and ask to speak to Rapisardi. And of course, he didn't speak to anybody other than one of Rapisardi's guys, who said to him basically, get out of here. Who are you? We don't talk to people we don't know. He persisted, and he kept going back to the club, to this coffee shop, and till finally, I think probably the guy he spoke to got tired of saying no to this guy, and he said, all right, you can talk to him. And he introduced him to Rapisardi. So Luigi was like, oh my God, I finally could speak to this guy. And then Rapisardi treated him the same way. Who are you? I don't know you. Get out of here, that kind of thing. And he persisted. And he finally got to the point of Rapisardi accepting a coffee from him and saying, okay, sit down. Let me hear what you have to say. And he talked to him, and he told him what he wanted, which is to become a man of honor, is the way he called it. And you could see that, we put that in the title of the book, a hitman's quest for honor. And he's been trying and was trying to become what he called a man of honor from his early days in Catania. Rapisardi took a liking to him and began to use him as a guy that collected for debts. Luigi was a tough guy. not afraid to use his hands. Maybe he wasn't physically imposing, but you wouldn't want to get him angry. And so Rapisardi used them that way, and he broke them in. And then he started to really, really, trust them. And Rapisardi finally said, and he kept, and Luigi kept pestering him. When are you going to make me? When are you going to make me? When am I going to become a made man? And Rapisardi said, not yet. You got to wait. So Rapisardi had a job in Milan for Luigi. And the job was to kill a guy, a businessman in Milan who owed Rapisardi money. Now here's Luigi, a guy who is a peasant in Sicily. He's never been out of Catania, worked on the railroad in Sicily and in his town. And now he is being asked to go to, one of the premier fashion capitals and money capitals of the world in Italy to kill a businessman. So he said to himself, and he told me, he said, I know if I turn this down, that's it. I know. He said, I know, get to be a man of honor. And he said, I took the job. So Rapisardi gave him the information as to who it was, and Luigi began what would become his MO in terms of killing people. He gets on, first of all, he tells his wife a lie that he's going somewhere. He's got to go do some business. I forgot what the lie was, but it wasn't, I'm going to Milan to kill somebody. And because he was gone for 2 days, he gets on a ferry, goes to Naples, gets a train from Naples to Milan, and he finds out where this guy, he knew an address. Rapisardi had given him some information, and he finally found the guy. And he did what he always did later on in his career as a hitman, which is to kind of surveil him, stake out, watch him. When does he leave for work? When does he go home? Where does he live? That kind of thing. So the second day, he felt that he had enough. Second or third day, a couple of days anyway. He had enough information, and he's there, and he kills him, shoots him on the street as the guy was coming out of his house and going to work. Luigi gets back on the train, down to Naples, back on the ferry, back to Catania, goes to a florist and buys his wife a big bouquet of flowers, and walks into his house and apologizes for being away for a couple of days, gave her the bouquet of flowers, and he felt everything was good at home. She didn't give him a hard time. The next day, he goes to the coffee shop to tell Rapisardi what had happened, and Rapisardi hands him a newspaper from the mainland, from Italy, from the one of, I forgot the name of the newspaper. And what's on the front page? The hit of this businessman in Milan. And Rapisardi tells him, you had a great job, such and such. And now Luigi is very, very happy. I did this, etc. So because he was successful, Rapisardi starts giving him more jobs. He gives him another couple, he does 2 hits in Rome. One of them, he hits the guy right near the Trevi Fountain in Rome. He followed the guy and hits him there, kills him, gets into the crowd, and disappears. So he's done a few more hits, and every time, and he said to me, Mike, I don't kill anybody who doesn't deserve to be killed. They all dishonor. They're all dishonored. What they did, they were dishonorable people. I didn't kill anybody that didn't deserve to be killed. And that was his deal with me anyway. He kept telling me that, the people he killed all deserve to be killed. So that's his idea of honor. And he so after he does the hits in Rome, he goes to Rapisardi again and says, okay, how about now? Am you going to make me? Am I going to be a made man? And Rapisardi gives him this idea of, no, not yet. Now, what that was, Rob, was Rapisardi telling him, you ain't going to become a made man. And I think that he wasn't because of the way he looked. I really do. He didn't carry himself the way that the others did. He was very disrespected by even the people in Sicily in terms of the way they addressed him and the way that he not the way he carried himself, but the way that they approached him and the way that they handled him and their interaction. And I think that was the reason why. So Rapisardi says, but no problem. You need to go to America. He said, and you need to go to Brooklyn because Knickerbocker Avenue, he gives him the street, which is the headquarters for the Bonanno family. And he said, they need people like you there. So Luigi says, and Rapasardi also tells him, when you go and you use my name as an introduction, and it'll be no problem, and they'll accept you. And it's much easier to become a made man in the U.S. than it is in Sicily. So he finally he had 2 daughters and his wife, gets to the United States, gets a small apartment in and around Knickerbocker Avenue, not that far away, not that close, but close enough for him to be able to get back and forth easily enough. And he goes to Knickerbocker Avenue the first day, like he did with Rapasardi, and he finds out what's the main coffee shop. And by the way, the boss at that time was a guy named Licata, Peter Licata. He was the Bonanno boss at the time. And Licata was into gambling and loan sharking, etc., not drugs. And I'll tell you why that's important in a second. So he finds out where Rapasardi hangs out. He heard about Rapasardi being the guy that not Rapasardi, a guy named Pino DeQuana. DeQuana is sort of Licata's second in command. And they tell Luigi, people in the neighborhood, people he knew from Sicily, tell him that's the guy you got to get to if you want to meet Licata. So he said, finds out where does DeQuana hang out. Look, DeQuana has his own coffee shop, of course, and social club, and he walks in. Guess what happened? The exact same thing. Who are you? Get the hell out of here, by some guy who wasn't DeQuana, but he saw who he thought was DeQuana sitting at a table, dressed to the nines, nice shoes, nice suit, and he didn't forget the face. So what did he do? He kept coming back until he finally got the guts to just simply walk up to Licata, to DeQuana, and introduce himself using Rapasardi's name, the guy from Sicily, expecting, the door's going to open and I'm going to be accepted and, hug me, etc., etc. No. DeQuana says, basically, who are you? Get the hell out of here. And he has to do the same thing that he did in Sicily. Finally gets to sit down with DeQuana. And this time, instead of offering him a coffee, he bought him a drink, I think, a Sambuca, and a glass of Sambuca, and sit down, and they had a drink. And he tells him who he is and what he's doing there, etc. And DeQuana kind of likes him. And he says, all right, basically, I'll give you a shot. Let's see what you can do. And he gives him little small jobs that, similar to what Rapasardi did, and Luigi does well. Then DeQuana takes it a step further, and he introduces him to one of the guys that was DeQuana's main people who did things for him, robberies, etc., collecting money, all kinds of stuff like that. A guy by the name of Paolo Laporta. And Luigi, by this time, had been doing well with DeQuana. And when he was introduced to Laporta didn't really like him. He said, essentially, this is a threat to me. This guy's moving in on my territory. But he had to do it because the boss told him that he had to be nice to him and they had to become friends. It's like going to the playground and say, your mama tells you, go ahead, go make friends. Well, this guy was told, you got to work with this guy, Luigi. So Laporta says to him, okay, we got a big job to do. We got to go collect money after a couple of, I guess, a few days, maybe a few weeks. Laporta says to him, we got to do a big job to do. We got to go to a drugstore in another part of Brooklyn. The owner owes money to DeQuana, and we got to go collect it. And he said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to drive in my car, and you, Luigi, are going to go into the store with your gun, and you're going to collect what the store owner owes our boss. So he walks into the store, and he announces who he is and what he's there for. And he says that it's the druggist that had them, that owed the money. He said the druggist reaches under the counter, takes out a gun, and starts shooting at him. close range, starts shooting at Luigi. Luigi says the good thing is the guy was a bad shot because he missed me. I run out of the store because I get in the car and get out of there, and the car is gone. Laporta took off. Now it dawned on him. This was a setup. Laporta knew that the druggist had a gun and that if he sent Luigi in there, the guy was going to pull a gun on him and shoot him. Luigi wanted to kill him, kill Laporta. So that he makes his way back to Knickerbocker Avenue, goes to Daquana, tells Daquana what happened, and that he wants to kill Laporta. Now Laporta was one of the made guys there, so you can't kill him without running the risk of the boss killing you. So what happens is they have a sit down that night, meeting in a social club, and Laporta is there, Luigi's there, Daquana is there. And this is when he first meets a guy by the name of Peter Licata, who was the actual boss. And Luigi tells him what happened, and he says, I want to kill this guy. And they tell him, you're not killing anybody. And they make Laporta apologize and then give him half of what the amount was that they were supposed to get from the druggist. They said it was nothing. It was like $2,000 or something. But they told him, if you two don't make friends and don't become, squash this, it's going to be a problem. He and Laporta then become great partners in crime. They start doing all kinds of things for the family, and they start working together and work very well together. Laporta forgives him, and they become friends. So he tells me, this is a very interesting one. He tells me about another one of Laporta's excursions with him. He gets in his car and they drive to upstate New York, miles away from the city. And it's nighttime. And they pull up down the street from a pizzeria in this town in upstate New York. He didn't remember the name of the town. It didn't make a difference. And they break into the pizzeria, and Laporta disconnects the gas lines to all of the stoves and pizza ovens in the store and closes the door and locks it. And then they leave, get back into the car, drive about a half a block away and sit and wait. And Luigi says, well, what are we doing? What did you do that for? What's that all about? I thought we were here to collect money. He goes, wait. About an hour later, Laporta gets out of the car, goes to a payphone. This is how long ago it was. They're actually payphones, and calls the pizzeria on the payphone. Jumps back into the car. By the time he gets back into the car, the pizzeria explodes in flame. He tells Luigi that the gas fumes from disconnecting the hoses or the gas lines exploded when the phone rang because a small spark happens in the phone that nobody knows about, and that was enough to set the whole place off and blew the hell out of this place. So that's how that's one of the jobs he did. And their biggest job was then their next big thing was they were to drive from Brooklyn to the Canadian border, cross over into Canada. They both had legitimate passports. Go into Canada, meet Sicilians who were coming from Sicily for the same reason, and I never got to this yet, but the same reason that Luigi was instructed to come to Brooklyn, they're coming for the same reason. So what Laporta and Luigi's job was to bring counterfeit passports to all of these Sicilians, give it to them in Canada, and then they would use them to cross the border and come down to Brooklyn. Now, what was this all about? The actual boss, Joe Bonanno of the Bonanno family, and Carmine Galante, who was his second in command, very notorious drug dealer, and Bonanno was into drugs. Now, from The Godfather and many other movies, drugs were supposed to be a no-no for the wise guys back then, right? It was such bullshit, Rob. All it was, don't do it. Don't do it. Don't do it. Meanwhile, make sure that you pay me when you do it. I just don't want to know about it. That kind of thing, right? So what Galante and Bonanno were setting up and had set up was what turned out to be the French Connection. They were importing drugs, or drugs were being imported from the Middle East, Turkey, etc., into Sicily, where it was refined, and into Marseille. And from Marseille, it came across into the United States, and it came to wherever they were picking it up, and it was being distributed across the country. And that's what Luigi wound up working on. He wound up working on the French Connection. And why did the Bonannos want all these Sicilian hitmen to be around? Well, they weren't sharing with the other families the way that they should be sharing. They were lowballing everybody if they shared with them at all. And they realized that, Bonanno did anyway, if the Gambinos and the Genovese and the Lucchese's and the Colombos found out about this, we'd have a war on our hands, and we need soldiers if it happens. So that's why Luigi, was ultimately came to America. And and what he was doing was he was transporting drugs. He was bringing French Connection drugs that were imported into Brooklyn to the Gambinos. He would drive in a car from Knickerbocker Avenue, which is in the northern part of Brooklyn, down to where the southern part of Brooklyn, where the Gambino headquarters was, and that was the pipeline. And Luigi was delivering for them. That was one of his jobs before he became a hitman. Before he became a hitman as his main source of work and income. So I say to him at some point, I say, "Tell me, how did you get to become a hitman in New York?" So he tells me this whole story that I just told you, and he said that he finally gets to meet Licata, and Licata needs him to do a job. Licata ran a lot of these illegal gambling spots around Knickerbocker Avenue, and in one particular one, his main one, he was losing money, and he couldn't figure out why. And Licata knew that Luigi was a gambler. He was many things: a gambler, a womanizer. He drank, and of course, he committed crime after crime after crime. So he said to him, "Look, I know that you know casinos and gambling operations. Go there, find out what's going on." So he didn't have to go very far. It was the casino was upstairs from the social club. That's where the illegal casino was. So that night, he goes upstairs and he goes to the bar that's in the casino and he watches. And he says to me, "I figured it out in no time." He said, "I see these two guys and I see what they're doing." And I went closer and then I sat down at the table and I realized what they were doing was they were using counterfeit money. And then on their winnings, were getting legitimate money back. They were essentially laundering this counterfeit money. And then when Licata and his people counted it, they realized it was no good. And that's how Licata was losing the money. He didn't know exactly what it was, but that's what it was. And so I said, "So what'd you do?" He says, "So they break in the game. I'm at the bar." He says, "I called the two guys over and I say to them, 'You're stealing from Mr. Licata.'" No, you don't know what you're talking about." "No, I see you." He says, "I know what you're doing." He says, "It doesn't stop now. You're going to have to deal with me. I'm going to kill you both." That was the end of the problem. They left that night, never came back again. Licata's ecstatic, right? He solves the problem. He still doesn't trust Luigi to do some of the major things yet. And then one day, Luigi got his break. He's now working in the casino, and he's a dealer. And he's working and dealing cards at a blackjack table. And there are 4 or 5 guys at the blackjack table sitting there, and they're all made guys in the Bonanno family. They're all made men. They're all mafiosi. And he hears them talking, and they're talking about another made man. And they're saying that he needs to be killed. And he hears what that guy was doing. The other made this guy they were talking about was pimping out the wife of another dead mafiosi. The guy died. He had a young, beautiful wife, according to what these guys at Luigi told me. And he was pimping her out, unbeknownst to her family, her regular family, and unbeknownst to the Bonannos. Until the mother and father of this young woman went to one of the Bonanno bosses and said, "This is what's happening." And that was a no-no. That was a no-no. They said he had to go. But none of the guys at the table wanted to do it because he was their friend. And they kept talking about it. I don't want to do it. It's got to be done. I want to do it. And Luigi says, recognizes this is his chance. And he says, I'll do it. Now, they had no idea who this guy is. And he winds up doing it. He does the same thing. He finds out where the guy works, where he lives. He does the whole surveillance thing. And a particular morning when the guy came out of work, he was getting into his car. Luigi comes up behind him, shoots him in the head, kills him. What does he do next? This is another thing that he does now for every hit he does. He gets in his car and he drives to Atlantic City. At that time, no gambling yet in Atlantic City. He drives to Atlantic City, New Jersey, gets a hotel room, and spends 4 or 5 days in the hotel room until things calm down in Brooklyn, and he drives back to Brooklyn. That was the way he did every other hit that he did in Brooklyn. He did exactly the same thing. So now he does this hit. He's a hit. He's a he's a guy that that is now trusted, and they know that they can trust him, and he becomes a regular hitman. Now, one of the things that happens is that Licata, as I told you before, did not believe in drugs. He didn't sell drugs. He wasn't involved in the drug dealing. But the people in the Bonanno family recognized that in order for them to share, sorry, not to share, but to make more money, he had to agree because they had this French connection thing set up, and he wasn't allowing his men to do what other people in the family were doing. They were making a lot of money. And he also was making noise that he was going to try to shut this whole thing down. He wasn't cooperating with Bonanno, wasn't cooperating with Galante. So what do? They kill him. And they install a guy by the name of Salvatore Toto Catalano as the boss of Knickerbocker Avenue. And he's a big drug guy, and I'll get more of that later. So Luigi now is off on his career as a hitman. And when he's sitting down with me, I said to him, okay, so you told me about, Catan, you told me about Milan, you told me about the first guy you hit. Tell me something else. Why should I believe you that you're this hitman? Give me another example of what you've done. So this one, Rob, goes into the category of, you can't make it up. If I told you this, you'd say, you made that story up. There's no way that it could happen. So he tells me this story. I said, okay, let's hear it. So he gets a call. Now, this is after he's been now, DeQuana trusts him. DeQuana has used them. Licata has used them. He gets a call from DeQuana one day, and he says, come to the club on Knickerbocker Avenue. He does. And DeQuana says, I have a job for you. And this is what the job is. The day before, a cop, police officer from Newark, New Jersey, comes to Brooklyn. And he's looking for, he comes to meet DeQuana. They were both Sicilians. They both were born in Sicily. They both came to the United States. And he says to DeQuana, I got a problem and I need your help. He had a sister who was married to a guy who was a degenerate gambler. And the gambler was also a businessman. So the sister was living very well, businessman, the business was well, but he was a gambler and he gambled all the time. And one of the places that he gambled was a regular card game with other gamblers in New Jersey, other guys, some of whom were wise guys, some who weren't, but they had this regular a card game every week. And the guy was terrible at gambling. He was losing money all over the place. So he's got this one night, they're at the game, and he's losing, and then he starts to win, but not the way he wanted to. He had a little bit of a pot, but not much yet. He knew that he needed to continue playing. Gamblers don't understand that they got to quit. They keep thinking that they're going to make it back if they keep gambling. Instead, they're going to keep losing more. So that's what he did. So he has this great hand. They were playing poker, and he knows. He says to him, this is a winning hand, but he doesn't have enough money in the pot. He doesn't have enough money in his bank to put into the cover the pot. So what he does is he puts up his wife as the ante, and they all agree, okay, and he loses. He loses, and the deal was that if you lose, that we, the other 2 or 3 guys, have to go home with you, and we get to essentially rape your wife for the entire night. And that's what happened. He walks in, tells his wife what's going on, and she, the next morning, after they had been raping her the entire night, she calls her cop brother in the newer cop, tells him what happened, and he at that point knows that his brother-in-law has to go. Now, he can't go to the DeCavalcanti family, which is a family in Jersey, which, by the way, was I don't know if you're familiar with you must be familiar with the show The Sopranos, right? Well, the DeCavalcantis were the model family for the Sopranos. They were New Jersey mobsters. So he can't go to them because the cop knew at the time that the DeCavalcanti family was under investigation and that their social clubs and businesses were wired. So he knew that if I go to one of them, I'm going to get picked up on the wire, and that's going to be it. So he remembers his old friend from Sicily in Brooklyn, and he goes to DeQuana. And he says to DeQuana, tells him the story that I just told you. And DeQuana says, don't worry about it. He says, I will make sure that this gets done. I'll take care of it. And he says to him, the cop says, I don't have a lot of money, etc. He says, don't worry. I'll take care of it. We'll worry about the money at the end. He calls now. DeQuana doesn't want to use, in his mind, he wants to use somebody outside of Knickerbocker Avenue. And he calls the Gambinos and asks for, who do you think we should use? A hitman, I need a hitman, etc. And the Gambino captain says to him, the best one around is your guy, Luigi, and he can be trusted. So he calls DeQuana calls Luigi, sits him down, tells him this whole story. And Luigi says to me, he says, I don't care if they pay me nothing. He said, this guy deserves to die. He said, it was my honor to kill him. And he does the exact same thing. He has to stalk him, but it's in New Jersey. And Luigi's not terribly familiar with New Jersey. So he has to go a few days early, and he checks a route to escape, that kind of thing. And he does it. Guy comes out for work one morning, but he's going fishing. He's not going to work. And Luigi's across the road from his house, takes a gun, shoots him one time, gets him right in the head. And I said to Luigi, one shot? You expect me to believe that? He goes, I'm a good shot, Mike. One shot, and he went down. That was it. So I said, okay, give me the information. Where can I find out about this thing? He says, you'll never find out about it. He said, because he didn't tell me why. He just said it was taken care of. And I figured that the cop must have taken care of it somehow. And that was the end of it. So he tells me that. And now I'm totally intrigued, and also we keep talking, and he ultimately gets to tell me about the Sindona situation and why he ultimately gets into my office with the FBI, which I alluded to before. And I'll tell you very quickly about what Sindona wanted. Sindona was arrested in Italy and in America. In Italy, for what he would do is he would take over a bank, and then he would bankrupt the bank. He would steal all the money, and then he would close the bank, and all of the depositors lost their money. They were angry, but there was nothing people could do. He was a criminal. He did it in Venice, and the people in Venice went to the cardinal who was up there. They complained to everybody, went to the cardinal, and the cardinal knew, that it had to be done. And he at the time, he found out that this guy Sindona had moved down to Rome and was doing the same things with the Vatican. That Pope Paul VI in Rome had given him basically the run of the Vatican Bank. So the cardinal in Venice came down, spoke to the Pope. The Pope said, basically leave this alone. It's okay. Everything is cool. But he never forgot it. And I'll tell you why that's important in a second. So he bankrupts these banks in Italy, etc. And he finally, in Italy, gets caught. He finally gets caught, but not before Pope Paul VI dies. And the new pope is Pope John Paul I, the Cardinal of Venice. And when he becomes the pope, who Sindona knew, and the gamblers knew, not the gamblers, the wise guys knew, our days of using the Vatican Bank as our piggy bank are over. But they didn't want it to be over. So they cooked up this whole scheme and wound up killing John Paul I, poisoning him. And that was the end. When Pope John Paul II took over, they found out, and I learned this later on, that he didn't have the same problems. He just said everything that's happened before. We start fresh with me. But by that time, Sindona was dead anyway. So he kills John Paul I, comes to New York, and he takes over a bank here on Long Island called the Franklin National Bank, and does the exact same thing. Bankrupts the bank, but he gets caught in Italy, and he gets indicted in Italy. He gets caught in the United States, and the U.S. attorney, the federal prosecutors, indict him here in New York, Manhattan. And now he's got two problems. He's got a problem in Italy and a problem in New York. In his mind, according to Luigi, the way to take care of this problem is to kill prosecutors. In Italy, the judge / prosecutor he wanted dead, and in New York, they're dead. He wants the prosecutor killed. And he tells Luigi how he wants it done. After he kills the prosecutor in New York, he wanted him to stuff his pockets with drugs so it would look like it was a drug deal gone bad. That was his plan. So I said, well, why would he think that things would go away? There'd be just other prosecutors who would take over. And Luigi tells me that he said, by the time they do, things will change. By the time they get ready to go to trial, etc. So I told you before, Luigi thought about this, and Sindona's proposal was you kill both of them. I give you, was it 10 grand? I think at that time, 10 grand for each prosecutor, for each hit. And no, I'm sorry, 100 grand for each hit. And then I also want you to take care of a witness. You don't have to kill him. You just got to scare him in New York. So Luigi says, I'll do the witness, but I'm not doing the hits on either places. And that's what really turned them off to Sindona. And Sindona, at that point, tried to get someone else. He never got anybody to kill the prosecutor in New York, but he did get someone to kill the judge and prosecutor in Italy. And that hit actually took place. So Luigi tells me the story about how they intimidated the witness. He worked on Wall Street, and they went up to his office, and they intimidated him right in the middle of his office and his firm on Wall Street. And I guess that worked, but only temporarily, because ultimately Sindona does get convicted in New York. He's extradited to Italy, gets convicted in Italy, and goes to jail in Italy, where ultimately he's poisoned. He had this deal where every morning the people in the jails would prepare a thermos of coffee for him. Imagine, this guy really must have laid the money out for people. And one morning he gets this thermos of coffee, and it had been poisoned, and he wound up dead in Italy. So Luigi is now, was after he turns down Sindona, as I said before, he knows that time is short here in New York, and he's got to get out. So I said to him, but you had other friends, and what else? Did something else happen that you're not telling me about? And he said, well, yeah, he tells me about how he was, he did a kind of a surveillance for a jewelry robbery here in Manhattan on a particular street in Midtown Manhattan, 47th Street. It's called the Diamond District. And up and down the blocks are jewelry stores, big diamond dealers from all over the world and in the city. And everybody knows that there's a lot of money, a lot of jewels, etc. He sets up a robbery, Luigi, of one of the stores on 47th Street. And because he needs money, he always needs money. And he It's one of his things. So now keep in mind, this is what I want you to remember. He had that incident with the drugstore, right? Which stayed in his head, even though it was squashed somehow. It always was in his head that somebody was willing to do that to him. Now with this robbery, this jewelry store robbery, something else happens, and this is what happens. He does the robbery. He and another guy, and believe it or not, Rob, they come out of this is in the middle of the day. It's about noon, 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Midtown Manhattan is packed with people, and he robs this place and is able to get out. Diamonds stuffed all in his pockets, and he walks across town from the Diamond District is on 6th Avenue. So we're talking about long blocks. He walks all the way across town, the east side of Manhattan, to like 2nd Avenue. It's a long way. And he meets a guy there. This was the plan. And he hands off the diamonds to this guy. The plan was for Luigi then to go to Chicago, hide out until heat was off, come back to New York, where a guy in the Gambino family who was working with the Bonannos was going to have the diamonds already fenced, and they were going to split all the money. It was well over $1 million worth of diamonds. Now, the guy that was going to do this was a guy that Luigi didn't really like very much, and I don't think liked Luigi at all. So anyway, send him to Chicago. He gets a room in a hotel in Chicago, and he meets a woman in the lobby, and the woman talks to him, thinks he's a sophisticated guy, and likes him very much, and says, I should introduce you to my daughter. We're both staying here in a suite on whatever it is, one of the upper floors of the hotel. He said, where are you? What street? He says, I got this little room, etc. She says, well, why don't you move? We have plenty of room. You can come and stay with us in the suite. And I think the woman was trying to set him up with her daughter. So anyway, he packs up his things and he moves from, let's say, the 3rd floor, his room, to the penthouse. I think it was a penthouse. That night, 2 guys come into the hotel, speak to the desk clerk, and say to Luigi Ronsisvalle's friends and ask what room he's in. And she says, well, we're not permitted to tell you that, but I can take you to the room. I must go with you. They said, no, you stay here. What room is he in? So they then threaten her, and she gives him the room number, and they go up to the room. She had given him the key to get in, a pass key. They open the door, and they open fire, and they blast the entire room with gunshots. He's not in the room. He's with the woman up in the penthouse. He finds out because the police next day say whose room was all shot up. They interview Ronsisvalle, and he says, I know nothing. I know nothing. But he is seething now, that he knows that fence was the guy who set this whole thing up. And he comes back to New York, and there's this huge sit down of the boss of the Bonanno family, his people, then guys in the Gambino family, and they're in a restaurant in Manhattan, and they're there to supposedly to split the money up, but also to kind of squash this problem that Luigi's ready to kill this guy. Well, it turns out that the fence never fenced the diamonds. He never did what he was supposed to do. And Luigi is now seething and wants to kill him right there. And he says, no. So the fence tells him, well, we got the diamonds. Don't worry. He's got them all in front of him, and he's parsing them out to people. And there's one big diamond left, one big one. So Luigi says, okay, so I guess this is what they're going to do. They're going to give me this one, and it's probably worth a lot of money anyway. Just at that point, somebody walks into the restaurant, and Luigi looks up. It's Paul Castellano, who is the godfather of the Gambino family. He sits down. Hello. The fence takes the big diamond, passes it across the table to Castellano. Castellano puts it in his pocket. Thank you, fellas. And he walks out. Luigi is now out of his mind. He says to me, Mike, this guy does do nothing. He's not even connected. I do all the work. I get nothing. So I said, what'd you get out of this? He said, peace. They wanted to make peace. So they gave me $30,000. He said, I knew that the mafia in the United States is not the same as the mafia in Sicily. No honor. And they're, you've heard the old expression, no honor among thieves. Well, that's the way it is. So after the Sindona fiasco, and having had this thing with the diamonds and the other fiasco early on, Luigi finally says to me, when he turned me down, when Sindona turned me down, I had no choice. And he went into the FBI. And he gave himself up. Now, you remember last week you had asked me, the last time we met, you had asked me about the FBI. And so let me just tell you a little story about Luigi and the FBI. So Luigi is now with the FBI, let's say 2 nights. They're in a motel somewhere in New York. And he's being debriefed. And he gets a call. Luigi gets a call, still had his phone, from his wife. And his wife knew that he had turned himself in. His wife was told that she could stay in her house. There would be FBI agents outside, guarding the place. And she calls Luigi, and Luigi is seething now after he talks to her on the phone. He says, I want to kill the FBI guy in front of me. I said, what happened? He said, my wife tells me that she looked out the window and she sees 2, I'm sure she recognized the 2 wise guys. And they were not supposed to come anywhere near. First of all, how did they know that she was in there? In any event, he was seething. And he grabs the FBI agent in the room with him, and he was going to beat the shit out of the guy in the room. And they finally agree to take the wife, move her to another location, put her in a safe house, and he's happy. Until the next night, or 2 nights later, still in the motel, he had his debriefing session. He goes into his room. The FBI agents were in a new room next to him. And Luigi says, there's a knock on the door. And I open the door, thinking it's going to be the 2 guys that are guarding me. He said, it's 2 other guys. He said, I never saw them before. He said they were all dressed, looked like wise guys. And they just stared at him, didn't say a word. And in his mind, he had been, and his location had been blown, and he knew that he had to do something very quickly to get away from where they were. Otherwise, they knew where he was. They were going to kill him. And he had his FBI. He couldn't stand the FBI for doing this. He was cooperating, giving them everything, and yet they let him down twice in his mind. So he said to me, you make sure that my wife, I will talk to you, I'll tell you everything, but you got to make sure that my wife stays where she is and she's safe. I said, don't worry about it. That'll be taken care of. So I said to him, the first time I met him, I said, where are you in the Brooklyn house of detention? Because he was under arrest for that murder. They had him in protective custody. He was in a section of the jail that was away from general population. And I said to him, so how is it? Everything okay? And he said, yeah, everything is okay. People know that he was a mafia guy. And as it turns out, he comes back to me one day. He gives me this piece of information that I wasn't even looking for. It had nothing to do with the mafia. He had been approached in the jail by the son of a notorious reverend who was convicted of murdering young women in Brooklyn for a long time. And the son was in jail because he was convicted with his father. But he was down in New York for, I think, an appeal or something. And he wanted someone killed, this reverend son. And he went to Luigi knowing that he was a mafia guy and approached them and told them, I want my brother killed. There was a brother, his own brother, who knew where other bodies were buried. And he didn't want the authorities to find out where the bodies were buried because my boss, the DA, had been on television talking about, we convicted the father, now we're going to look for these other bodies. And Luigi came to me with this, and I said, this is great. Can you talk to him? And he did. He talked to him, and he got information from him. And he had a little ruse that we cooked up. And we said, listen, ask him, tell him that you're a mafia guy and that your guys need to know where these other bodies are buried because they want to see if you're legit or if you're a cop trying to suck them in. And he said, yeah, it's a good idea. And he did. And the guy told him where the bodies were buried. we did a search. I mean, it was too many years later, out in Queens, New York, east of Brooklyn, and we did a big search and never found the bodies. But Luigi gave me that information just as because he liked me. He didn't even know that I was involved in this case, which I had been. But he came in and gave me the information. So he was, it was a really interesting, Rob, relationship that I had with this guy. And I grew up in an Italian American family, and I think that if I had told my grandfather or my father and my grandmother and my mother that I had this relationship with the Sicilian hitman, they would have had a conniption. They would have been really upset. But it was. I thought about it later on after it ended that the guy, we were on a first name basis. The guy was telling me everything, and I was trying to help him out, and ultimately I did. He wound up taking a plea to the murder, didn't get 25 years to life. He got, I think it was like 5 years. And by that time, he had time in, but we told him that we'll do it. You can do your time at a federal facility as opposed to a state facility, which is horrible. Federal facilities are a lot better. And he says, okay. And he gets shipped to Minnesota, to the wilds of Minnesota in the Midwest. This is like sending him to Mars. He had no idea about the Midwest. He's a guy from the city in Sicily, from New York City. And now here he is. He told me he gets off the plane and then off the bus in Minnesota. And it's like, and it was a town that had a lot of quarries and things of that nature. And in my mind, I said, as I just said to you, it was like he was on the moon. He could very well have been on the moon. He had no idea where he was. He hated it. He hated the idea that he was there. And it actually turns out he had an attorney who was taking care of him, giving him information about what was going on in the real world, etc. And the attorney told him one day that about the president's commission on organized crime, and that the topic was going to be mob drug sales. And Luigi thought to himself, he said, this was my way out. And I got to tell you, Rob, when he was telling me all of this stuff, gave me all this information, I always had the feeling that he was holding back. These guys like to hold back and play a trump card later on if they need it. And that's what he was doing, because he's had the lawyer contact the detective who I had turned him over to after I was finished with him. They were still investigating the Bonannos on Knickerbocker Avenue, and Luigi was very helpful to them. And in fact, Carmine Galante was assassinated on Knickerbocker Avenue, and Luigi was in jail, but he knew. They asked him, "Who who did this? You think you know who did it?" And he said, "I'm in jail, but I get a guess." And he gave him the two names, Baldo Amato and Seja Bonaventri. And it turns out both of them were convicted many years later of killing Galante. So he calls this detective on the phone from Minnesota and says, I read about this. I heard about this. I heard about the president's commission. I can help. I have information. And what he was holding back was the information about what turns out to be the pizza connection. The pizza connection, the French connection, as you know, if you saw the movie, the French connection was wiped out. And they were wiped out of drugs on Knickerbocker Avenue. The pipeline was cut off when the French connection ended. And Luigi was still out at that time. And his trips from Knickerbocker Avenue to the Gambino territory ended. They had no drugs. And one day, one of the guys that he was working with on these trips comes to him and says, we're back. And Luigi says, what are you talking about? He says, that idea of a pipeline? You bring oil to a place from another place. Well, we have a pipeline, a new pipeline. And what it was drugs coming from, I think it was Turkey, from Albania into Sicily, and then being packed into products that were used in pizzerias all over the Eastern Seaboard, as well as into the Midwest. And what they were doing was the Mafia had purchased or co-opted pizzerias all over the area, so that when they got their deliveries from Italy and Sicily of tomato sauce and flour and all kinds of stuff for pizza making. In and amongst those packages were drugs. And the Bonannos would send a guy like Luigi to a particular location, pick up the drugs from the pizzeria, bring it back to Knickerbocker Avenue, and they would split it up and then sell it and move it across the country. So that's the information he had. And he knew that the people in Congress were doing this investigation. This hearing was set up, and he talked his way into becoming one of the main witnesses in this hearing. And his testimony was heard by Rudy Giuliani, as well as this guy Louis Freeh, who became the head of the FBI. He was the prosecutor. They were doing the pizza connection case, and they used Luigi as one of the main witnesses in the pizza connection case. They wanted to know the evidence of the distribution of the drugs that would come in through the pizzerias. Where did it go? And Luigi was one of the people who was transporting this stuff across the country. One little interesting story. I said to him, "So tell me about that. What happens?" I'm sorry. I found this out later on. I said, "What happened?" What he used to do was they told him that he was going to have to start, once the pipeline was open again, they were going to have to start moving drugs across the country. And when I say me, what I did was, when I wrote the book, I was able to get FBI and police department files. I had a particular friend who was working on the case, and I had the files, so I read all of their interviews. What he said he did was, they told him to buy a suit of clothes, a men's suit, several sizes too big for him. And what he would have to do is go to a particular location, Knickerbocker Avenue, where he would get the drugs. It would be strapped to his body, stuffed into the suit, pockets all over, and then he was to go to John F. Kennedy Airport here in New York, buy a ticket to California with this particular situation, and he was to wait until the very last minute to board the plane. Now, at that point, there were no metal detectors. There was nothing. You walk in, you have a ticket, you get to the ticket, to the gate, and you hand it in, you get on the plane. But they didn't want him to have any issues. They just wanted him to kind of be the last person in so no one would bother him. So he waited and waited and waited and watched. And as soon as the last person online got to the ticket taker, he jumped up and went in on the plane. So I found out what he did. He never took his jacket off. And they told him, "Don't fall asleep. Don't fall asleep. When you get to California, there's going to be somebody meeting you at the airport, and he'll take you to a location." And that was a regular thing. And he partied with this guy in California. Then he'd come back to New York. A few weeks later, he'd get another load, do the same thing, would go to California again. And he became a friend with this guy in California who was distributing the drugs on the West Coast. He also did it in Chicago. He had to go to Chicago. Now, in Chicago, it was a little different. No plane. It was a train. And he had the drugs not on him. He had it in a suitcase. They were packed in a big, thick suitcase. And he was told, when you get on the train, don't put the suitcase in the overhead. Keep it underneath your seat. And again, don't fall asleep. When he gets to Chicago, comes out of the station, there's a guy who was supposed to be a taxi driver. He was there with a car that looked like a cab. And he knew what Luigi looked like. And he said, "You need a cab?" Luigi knew it was him. He said, yeah, I need a cab. You get in a cab. You drive around the corner away from the entrance to the station. Get out of the cab. Take the suitcase out. Empty all of the stuff out into the car somehow. You get the empty suitcase back. The cab would then take off. He would walk around the block, buy a ticket to New York, and get back on the train and go to New York. And that's how he did Chicago. The last piece. He also had to go, this time he wasn't delivering, he was picking up from Knickerbocker Avenue to Miami Beach. he was told to be in Miami at a particular time on a particular day, and that someone would meet him there. And he asked his guy who was setting up all of this stuff for what. He says, "You'll see when you get there." So he takes a plane to Miami, and he finally makes his way to a particular location on a street corner in Miami Beach, and it's morning, and he's waiting. He doesn't even know what's going to happen. And then he sees his man, a guy he knew from Knickerbocker Avenue, pulls up in a Porsche. Now that's not a big car; it's a very small two-seater, I think, and sports car. And he tells him, "Get in." He said, "What are we here for?" Tells him the back of the Porsche in the trunk is filled with heroin, filled bags and bags and bags of heroin. What are we going to do? He hands him a shotgun, hands Luigi a shotgun, says, "You sit in the seat. We're driving to Brooklyn." They drive all the way from Miami Beach in southern Florida to New York to Brooklyn. Don't stop at all the way straight through. Go to Knickerbocker Avenue, gets to Knickerbocker Avenue. They open up the trunk, and this guy Catalano takes the drugs and brings them into his social club. Now, that's why Luigi became so important in the Pizza Connection case, because he had this information. When he said that, when he testified to what I just told you to Congress, one of the senators asked him, "Well, why did you have a shotgun?" Luigi said to him, "We had a trunk full of heroin. What was I supposed to have? A pea shooter?" He said, "This was so that if anybody bothered us, we had a gun to shoot them if someone tried to hold us up." But think about it, Rob. How do you drive two not very blend in type of guys drive from southern Florida all the way to Brooklyn without being stopped one time? Through all of those little towns in the South, nobody stopped them. They made it all the way to New York, and he did it more than one time. So he became a very, very important witness, as you could imagine, for Giuliani. Testified at the Pizza Connection case, and they got a conviction. There was a conviction, and Luigi went into the witness protection program at this point. He never went back to the jail in Minnesota. Giuliani and the prosecutor got him out of that, but he had to go into witness protection. And now we have a Sicilian who was in Brooklyn doing all of this stuff, all kinds of money all over the place, women and drinking and all kinds of stuff. And now he's put into some series of little motels throughout the Midwest, in Iowa and in Arizona and in Oklahoma. And he says he's out of his mind. He says, "I can't live this way. I can't live this way." So what does he do? He contacts the lawyer for Catalano, the guy who was his boss in the Bonanno family, and who he just testified against and was instrumental in getting him convicted for what was going to be a life sentence. And he says to the boss, "Meet me." Not to the boss, to the lawyer. "I got something to talk to you about. Meet me in a motel." He was in Ohio at the time. "Meet me in a motel in Cincinnati, Ohio." And the lawyer and a reporter meet Luigi in this motel in Cincinnati, Ohio. Lawyer says to him, "What do you want?" He said, I made a mistake." He first tells him that, Toto was good to me. He said, "But they made me testify that way. I'll essentially take back what I said." And and he doesn't say it. He doesn't say, "But I want money." But the lawyer knows exactly what this is about. And the lawyer tells him, "I don't want to know it. I just want to know, are you recanting your testimony?" "Yes." "And are you willing to sign an affidavit and get on the witness stand and say that you recanted your testimony and what you said was a lie?" "Yes." And he starts again, and the lawyer says, I don't I'm not interested. I know what you want. Essentially, I know what you want. You want to get paid. Now, Rob, he didn't lie. He told exactly the truth, but he was willing to put himself back, essentially back in jail, because if a judge bought the fact that he lied under oath at the Pizza Connection trial, he would have been indicted and convicted of perjury. And he was out on parole from the jail, and he would have gone right back in and maybe even gotten years of time tacked on to his sentence. But he was counting on the lawyer taking this back to Catalano, and Catalano saying essentially, "Tell him to do it, and we'll take care of him." The lawyer meets him a second time, and essentially that's what happens. Without ever discussing money, but it was clear that that was what was going to be the end result. And the lawyer said that I don't want you to tell me or to testify when the prosecutor cross-examines you at a hearing that you were paid, for this testimony, for this recantation. So we're not talking about that. So Luigi says, essentially, I had no choice. I had to trust him. So he signs the affidavit recanting his testimony. And the affidavit gets filed with the court. Before the hearing that's set up, he has a come to Jesus moment. And he says to himself, what did I do? What did I do? So what does he do? He calls his old buddy, the detective who got him involved in this whole thing, Kenny McCabe, and he says, Kenny, I need to speak to you. Kenny was now working for Giuliani and Louis Freeh, and they bring him up, and he sits down with them, and he tells them, I'm sorry, I made a big mistake. I testified to the truth, under oath to the truth. I'm not recanting anything. And ultimately what happens is he has to go into court and tell the judge that he made the whole recantation thing up. He never recanted. He was in a bad way. And he's luckily he did not have any repercussions, from that recantation of the recantation. But ultimately there was. He goes back into witness protection. And now he's back into that life that he couldn't stand. Now, during the Pizza Connection trial, he met a guy named Joe Pistone, who you might know, who was the person who was behind Donnie Brasco. He was a FBI agent who went undercover and infiltrated I think it was the Lucchese family, but I'm not sure about that. And during the trial, Pistone was undercover, but he was also working on the Pizza Connection case. And he testified and met Luigi while they were being prepared for the trial. In fact, Luigi got to know him so well and liked him so well that they came in for a session of witness prepping, and Pistone was in there, and Luigi walks in with a birthday cake. It was Pistone's birthday, and Luigi baked the cake for him and brought it in to their prep session for the witness prep session. So he got to know Pistone, and after this whole recantation business, he went back into the witness protection program. Pistone was out now, out and about in his own business, and Pistone writes, and I got this from Pistone's book, that he stayed in touch with Luigi. Luigi always needed money, and Luigi used to ask him all the time for money, and he did it. He gave him money, but he wrote that Luigi was basically just a total fish out of water in this whole witness protection stuff. He just couldn't live this way. And ultimately he found out, Pistone found out that Luigi took his own life, killed himself because of this stuff. Now I thought, and I learned the suicide part when I was writing the book. I did the research and found that out. Before that, I was told by somebody who was involved in the case that he was dead, but I was told that he died in jail. But that's not so. He killed himself while he was out of jail. And as you know, the bottom line is when his testimony before Congress really kind of set the stage for a lot of the things that ultimately happened to him after. And one of the things that he One of the senators, when he was introduced, he was sworn in, sat down, and senator said to him, "Well, tell us who you are, and what do you do?" And he told him his name, and he said, "Senator, homicide is my business." That's what his testimony was, and of course, that's where we got the title of the book from. And then he also repeated that whole thing about little boys in America want to be baseball players, and in Sicily we want to be mafia. So a lot of newspaper articles that I researched that his testimony was very, very well covered in that congressional hearing. It was down in Miami Beach, and he did very well. And at the time, they were calling him the most important, mafia informant since Joe Valachi. So it's in that world, that's a big kudo for them. But he was a guy, I have to tell you, that I clearly will never forget. I'll never forget. And his deal to me was always, I didn't kill anybody. People who hired me to kill them, they're responsible for the death, not me. That was his thing. And the whole thing about honor. I only kill people who deserved it. And I got to tell you, I know of only 2 murders that he did that were personal. One of them was in Sicily before he came to America. He was working on a railroad, I told you, and he had a disagreement with one of his fellow workers, and the guy disparaged them and was just kind of rude to him, and was rude to his family, called him names, all kinds of stuff. And that was enough in his head. Being dishonored, as he called it, was enough. So he killed the guy, in the railroad worker. And the other time was in New York, in Brooklyn. He was at one point, shouldn't say at one point, all the time, he was always looking for money. He was always short of money because he was a gambler. He was a big gambler. And he used to collect for the wise guys, for the bosses, collect debts and loan shark money, etc. So he knew, loan shark business. If I could be the loan shark as opposed to collector, I'm going to make a lot more money because they're going to pay me the interest, etc. And when you borrow money from a loan shark, the interest, which they call the VIG, is what gets paid every week. The principal almost never gets paid because the VIG doesn't reduce the principal; it just repeats for the next week. The principal stays the same. So you have to pay the whole thing off at once in order to make any kind of to save yourself any kind of money if you're a borrower. So Luigi realized this was a great business, but he had no money. He didn't have money to put out on the street. He had people who wanted to borrow money from him, but he tells me I had no money. So he found out from one of his friends from the Gambino family that there was a guy in the family who was a loan shark himself. And the Gambino spoke up for Luigi to the loan shark and said, listen, he needs money. He's looking for $5,000. He's one of us. Don't charge him interest. That's what he was looking for. He didn't want the VIG. Luigi said, I can't pay the VIG. I can pay the principal back. So the Gambino friend told him, go to this guy. He worked at a place called the Ices Queen of America. He sold lemon ices to restaurants and all kinds of places in New York. And the guy was the owner. And Luigi went to see him and introduced himself. And the guy treated him like he was dirt. He said, I don't care that you were recommended. He said, I'm going to lend you $5,000, no VIG, but I want the money in, I think he gave him a week. Luigi, in his own mind, said, not a problem. I have people who I know want the money, and they're promising me to pay me back in a few days with the interest. So the guy gives him the $5,000. And he goes back to Knickerbocker Avenue, gives the money, loans the money to these borrowers who he's expecting to get the money back. I think it was like 3 days later. They told him, no problem. We know you. We know who you are. We don't want to mess with you. They never show up. They took the money and left. Now Luigi's got a problem. He's got to go back to the ISIS Queen guy and tell him he needs more time to get the money together, the $5,000. And he goes back on a Friday night after the place is closed, and the guy's in the owner is in his office, and Luigi tells him this story. He says, "I need, just give me until Monday or Tuesday, and I'll have the money for you." The guy says to him, basically, "No. If you don't have the money, no." He says, "I need a week." And the guy says, "No. This is Friday. If you don't have the money to me by Monday, then there's going to be problems." So Luigi doesn't argue with him. He leaves, gets in his car. He tells me, "I'm driving home." And as he's driving home, it's like burning in his head. Why? Because he's been disrespected and dishonored. He said, "Someone spoke for me on my behalf. They promised that I get the money back. This guy doesn't take their word, doesn't take my word." He said, "That wasn't good enough for me." He said, I don't want to be dishonored." You know what he did? He went back to the location, saw that the place was now mostly closed, but there was a light on in the guy's office. And he walked in, and the guy was at his desk. And he said, "You want the money? Here." Shot him right at his desk and killed him. I left him there. It's not the end of the story. So several days later, he goes, obviously he's not going to do anything out of the ordinary. He goes to the guy's wake, to the guy he killed. He goes to his wake. And the dead guy's brother, who's also a wise guy, is at the wake. And he grabs Luigi, and Luigi now is saying to himself, he said, "Oh, the guy's not going to hassle him. He doesn't know who killed his brother, and he doesn't know it's Luigi." You know why he hassled Luigi? He says, "I know my brother lent you $5,000. He says, I want that $5,000 back." This is the mentality of these guys. It's just unbelievable. So you can tell, basically, even the fact that I'm laughing now, that for those months that I was with this guy, it was as entertaining. It's like I was watching television. This guy sitting in my desk in my conference room, talking to me and telling me these stories, and it was I didn't want it to end. In fact, I got promoted out of the homicide bureau at that point and had to go to another part of the office, and I had to leave Luigi with another assistant DA who took the plea, etc. I felt bad that I had to leave him and that I had to go somewhere else, and I wasn't in court to finish the deal, and he got sentenced to what he got sentenced to. So I there's probably a lot of things that I haven't told you, but I've been talking now for an hour and a half, so I think we should, if you want to, we can move on to another topic. But that's Luigi the Zip, and the book is Homicide Is My Business: Luigi the Zip, a Hitman's Quest for Honor. Now, the one thing you didn't ask me, why is he a zip? Did you ask me that before? Did I ever tell you that? Okay.
I've got a list of questions here to ask you. But
the Zips was the name that the American Mafia guys gave to the Sicilians who were coming over to be the shooters. They were disrespected because they look, the guys here thought they were like country bumpkins, and the word zip has I've heard different derivations of it, different understanding of the derivation. One was because these guys, the Sicilians, were making their own guns and they were called zip guns, and they were using zip guns. The other is that they talked too fast. It was like zipping around, with their language. And the other, I don't know where the other one, I forgot what the other one was, but those were the two. But the bottom line is, if you were called a zip, that was a term of dishonor. And Luigi did not like being called a zip. And but everybody here in America called him and all of his compatriots a zip. They still do. So
still do. Thank you very much for explaining that. That was fascinating. Brilliant. Thank you. I'm actually listening to an audiobook on the Rizzuto family, and I've got to the stage where Galante does get taken out, and he surrounds himself by the Zips, doesn't he? And it's ironic, and it goes into an arrest that was made for the pizza connection, where there was a drop right outside a mall, a pizza shop, where there was an exchanging of money for drugs.
Right.
and one of the cops chase one of the cars anyway and get somebody. I haven't got any farther than that. And then it was ironic that the Zips actually took him out, and he was the
Well,
one. He took them in, didn't he?
yeah, but you know that the reason there was a reason for Galante being killed that maybe a lot of people don't know, but I learned this from Luigi. The problem was with Galante and with the people that his bodyguards were actually the ones who set up the murder, Baldo Amato, and Bonventri, and they hired outside people to come into Joe and Mary's restaurant at Knickerbocker Avenue, a little Italian restaurant. They were sitting in the back on the terrace when these guys walked in, and the shooting occurred. Um, Baldo Amato and Bonventri that day, when they dropped off Galante at the restaurant, they were wearing leather jackets. It was the middle of the summer. It was like 90 degrees, and they both had thick leather jackets on. The reason is they knew what was coming. And when the shooters came in, they ducked down underneath the table so that and had the jackets on supposedly to prevent them from getting hit with any shrapnel. That's what the jackets were all about. But they set him up. They set Galante up using. I mean, Catalano was involved as well because they felt that they weren't getting enough money out of the drugs that Galante was selling. He was making millions, Rob, millions. And his own people, the guys that were working for him, weren't making enough money. He wasn't sharing the way that they liked it. So they set up the hit, and that was it, and that's how come he got killed.
And if my memory serves me right, one of the reasons the cops knew who these guys were was because right after the killing, they went to the Gambino social club and were hugged and kissed by the Gambino guys outside the social club. So it was caught on CCTV or
Might be.
whatever we call
You
it
mean
back in Italy.
Amato and Faldo Amato and Bonventri? Yeah, it was
Yeah.
known almost. I'll tell you, 3 days later, I was still in the same place, in the DA's office, and I had Luigi as my informant, and who walks in but a lawyer with Baldo Amato and Bonventri. They were coming in because the cops knew that they should be questioned, and they came into the DA's office for questioning, and I find out later on from Luigi that his best guess, and it was right on the money, was that they were the ones who set the whole thing up, and it turns out that they were. So that story about being kissed outside a Gambino club, I never heard that before, but it's not to say that it's not true. But it was common knowledge almost that they were involved, and how could they not be thought of as involved when they walk into a place with this guy dressed in leather in the middle of the summer? I mean, it was July, I think, when he was killed. So, but anyway, so that was one of the things that I did learn from Luigi, and they were cheap. Galante was cheap and was not willing to share the wealth, so to speak.
Also said about Galante in the book, I forget the author's name, that Galante had he was a psychopath, had like very low intelligence, and wasn't a particularly nice person to be
Absolutely,
around.
absolutely. Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That's what I knew about it. I got to tell you, this is a little funny. I have it in the book, but I got to tell you that the day he was killed was a beautiful day, and I know it was beautiful because I was out on on a baseball field. The homicide bureau of the DA's office was playing softball against the homicide squad of the police department that day, and I was in center field playing ball, and the other team was up, and I'm waiting, and I see all these cars now drive up to the field, and the guys who were in the other dugout, which were detectives, all milling around, and I see people starting to leave. So, and the guys now, my colleagues in the DA's office now start walking off the field. I'll get to the home plate, which is the center, or to the pitching mound, the center of the field. And I said to someone, "What the hell's going on?" And he said, "Carmine Galante just got killed on Knickerbocker Avenue." And then 2 days later, I'm involved in dealing with the Baldo Amato and Cesar Bonaventri. So
Oh.
that's It was in Coney Island. I'll never forget it. The Lincoln High School baseball field is where I was when that happened, and that was the end of the game. Everybody took the detectives all took off, and we went back to the office. So,
Did you replay the match?
did I replay it? Do we replay it? Well, the next year we replayed it. Yeah, we did. Not that year. That year was that was the end. So
Oh, that's a cool story.
yeah, yeah.
Just a question that popped in my head. It's probably more of a silly question than a sensible one. Who paid for the beers and the food for this guy when you were in the state when he Luigi came into you first of all?
Oh, the DA's office did. I
The
would.
D's office paid
Yeah,
for it.
yeah. We would put in. Let's say if it was me who laid out the money, I'd put in what we called a chit. It was short for whatever it was. It was a voucher, and I would just go to our treasury or our place that doled out the money in the office, and I would give them the chit. They'd give me my money back. So
Do
I
you have to
probably
produce a
laid out most
receipt?
of the money, huh?
Oh, you probably laid out most of the money.
Oh
Did you
yeah,
have to
yeah, yeah.
produce a receipt? Like,
I'm sorry to get. I'm sorry. I didn't hear you.
did you have to produce a receipt?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. We knew
That sort of stuff.
the
Yeah.
detectives who went to get the food. They were guys who knew how to handle witnesses. We did that all the time. Witnesses and people like Luigi. So they knew what they needed to get from the restaurant in order to get repaid.
What happened? I don't know if you know this to Rapper Sandy.
Don't have any idea. I don't know.
No.
I never followed up with Luigi about Rapasardi. It didn't make it I had enough to worry about that he was telling me
No.
about what was happening in America that I never and that's a good question. Um I never had the curiosity to find out what happened to the guy. My suspicion is that either he died of old age or was murdered in Sicily, So
Because what I've found interesting is Luigi has disclosed a number of murders that he did in Italy, Sicily, and yet it doesn't appear that Italy were interested in questioning him or
correct.
charging him.
Yeah.
Was there any reason for that?
I don't know the answer to it, but it doesn't surprise me that that's the case. And Luigi could have solved it in a second if he had decided to become an informant back then. It was in the newspapers. He could have gone in and said, "I'm the guy who did the shooting. He's the guy who paid me to do it," and that's it. But that was never going to happen. That was never going to happen. I'm sure that nobody came forward. I know Luigi didn't come forward, and if anybody else knew about the killing in Milan or the killings in Rome, they never came forward to get any information. The bottom line was the Sicilian mafia was not. They don't fool around. If they found out you were an informant, that's it. You're dead. So, or your family is dead. So nobody's gonna talk.
So, do you think that there was corruption on the Italian authorities' part, or do you think that there was apprehension on their part because they might be targets of assassination?
I think that there probably is a little bit of both. I think that there was corruption is certainly something which I'm very used to since I did a lot of corruption cases in my career, and it could very well be corruption. But I think that it might be both. It might be that the Italian authorities didn't mess around with if mafia figures were involved because they knew that there was a price to pay, and it wouldn't surprise me. But I don't know that for a fact.
That's fascinating because I would imagine if it was certainly if it was in this country, I imagine in the States, if the roles were reversed, then America would want to question and charge or have this person punished for the crimes they committed
No
in
doubt.
their own country.
No doubt. But Luigi gave all of this information to the FBI before he came to me. So, so that if there was any interest in sharing this with the Italian authorities, it would have been from one, government agency to another, as opposed to a local prosecutor. But I never heard anything about them being interested in solving any of the cases that he was involved in Sicily or in Italy.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah. You say Luigi wasn't made in Sicily. Was he eventually made in the US?
Nope. Nope. That was another reason why he was upset. He had done all of this stuff, and rather than be made, he was essentially dishonored in his eyes, and he never got to be a made man. Never got to be a made man. He was always his quest for honor is what my writing partner and I used to talk about when we put this together, and ultimately, he did obviously meet or earn the title of an honorable man. He came to us and he gave us information and helped solve some of the biggest cases that we had. So I never actually told you about the case that I had. That ultimately, that was the case the reason why I got this, or the second reason. The first was that I was Italian. Second was that the open case was my case, and it's a very interesting case because it also fits into his idea of honor. He was approached again by Gambino. He had a contact in the Gambino family. I think the guy's last name was Mirable, and a family in Brooklyn, not a mafia family, father, mother, brother, sister mother and father went to the local mafia leader in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn, and told them that their relative, I forgot if it was the mother's brother or the father's brother, was raping their daughter on a regular basis, young girl, and he just kept doing it, and they found out about it. Girl was beside herself and told her family after he wouldn't stop, and they went not to the cops, they went to the wise guys, and Mirable gets the information and gives it to a hitman that he knew about from that area of Brooklyn. Excuse me. And the guy and he finds out, the hitman finds out that the bad guy, the rapist, is a chef at a very popular Italian restaurant in Bensonhurst called New Corner, the New Corner restaurant. And the hitman stakes it out, finds out who this guy is, and he sits outside the restaurant waiting for him to come to work, or leave work. I don't remember exactly. And when he gets there and he's sitting in his car, police cars are all over the place. Detective cars, police cars, nobody's in them. And he now is frightened to death. He figures, oh my God, somebody tipped them off. What am I doing here? He takes off. He doesn't do the hit. Turns out all the cops were in the restaurants eating. They were there to eat. It was a very popular place. They weren't there to catch anybody. Nobody knew about what was going on. So the family is now beside themselves. The Gambinos are embarrassed because their hitman is too much of a coward to go in and kill this guy. So Mirable hires Luigi, and he tells him what the story is. And Luigi says, again, you don't have to give me any money for this. This guy deserves to be killed. And what he does is he stakes out the place, and he finds out that the guy's a chef. And the first thing he does, the first time he's now trying to figure out where he is and how he works. When I told you he stakes him out and does things, he calls the restaurant and he says someone picks up and they ask for Enzo. Enzo was the chef, and they gets the answer. Enzo not here. He's in Sicily. Luigi says, okay. So I wait a couple of weeks. I call back. Enzo, is he here? No, Enzo's not working. He's still in Italy. His mama passed away. He's still in Italy. So he called one more time. Enzo. Enzo's not here. He's still in Sicily. Next time he calls, they say, yeah, Enzo, he's back. He's working tonight. He'll be here at 4:00. Luigi now gets the Mirable, the Gambino guy, and the girl, the young woman, into a car, and they drive to the restaurant. Now, Luigi has no idea what this guy looks like. So what he does is he has the young woman sitting in the back seat of the car, and he waits. It's around 4:00 when he knows that the chef comes to work, and she sees him, and she said, that's him. They drive the girl home. The Gambino guy picks up Luigi a little while, an hour or two later. No, I'm sorry, it was closer to closing time. So around 10:00, they drive to the restaurant. Luigi walks into the kitchen, and there's a guy in there, and the guys are all cleaning up. and he says, I'm here for Enzo. Enzo, he's over there. He's at the stove. Don't worry, he's over there. So he walks over and he says, you Enzo? Yeah, I'm Enzo. Who are you? Boom. He shoots him right in the head. Puts him, he's laying on the ground. Boom, another shot. Walks out of the restaurant, gets into the car, hands the gun to Mirabile, tells him, get rid of the gun. Which he's pissed off at Mirabile later on. He finds out Mirabile didn't get rid of the gun. He gave it to someone else. But he finds that out later. But that's not the point. I said, what happened next? He said, I dropped Mirabile off at his house and I drive to where? Atlantic City. And he spends a week in Atlantic City and comes back and he's a hero. Same way he was a hero when he killed that mafiosi guy who was pimping out the wife of the dead mafiosi. So that's the case that I had. He pled guilty to it, and he wound up going to jail. And that's where he went to Minnesota to do his time, and the rest is history, as they say. So
why? Excuse me. You gave a reason why you didn't think Luigi was made in Sicily because of his appearance, basically.
Correct. That's right.
Do you think that's the same reason that he wasn't made in the US? He was just uncouth.
Worse. He was a zip. He was a zip. And that's the same reason, Rob. It's just that now there was a little title to it, zip, as opposed to, what he wasn't obviously called that in Sicily. But yeah, absolutely. That's what I believe.
Was he ever proposed to be a made man?
Nope.
Do you think this guy is probably put in more work on the drugs level and the murder level than a lot of these wise guys?
Yeah.
And yet, in a strange way, I kind of feel a bit sorry for him.
Well,
you know what I mean.
I don't think I ever. Yes, I do know what you mean. I don't think I ever felt sorry for him, but I did feel that that it was the kind of thing where I could understand his disappointment and his frustration. And I think he would have been able to even kind of live with it somewhat if he hadn't had those things, if those things didn't happen to him. The whole thing with the Diamond District. I mean, they tried to kill him in Chicago. And then he was even further disrespected with when they had to divide up the diamonds, and he didn't even get one diamond, and he's the guy that did the multi-million-dollar holdup, and then walked halfway across Manhattan and handed it off to somebody without getting stopped. So he was very, very. He told me that, Mike, I realized that the American mafia was not like the Sicilian mafia. There was no honor in the American mafia, even though the people in Sicily told him, "Oh, it'd be a lot easier for you to become made." I think it was just kind of shuffling them off to another place, get them out of my hair, and that was it. I think that was really what it was. And when he got to America, he ultimately saw that things were a lot worse than what it was, in Sicily, the way he was treated. So. And he was very successful. I mean, doing the job for Daquana by killing that cop's brother-in-law on behalf of Daquana's childhood friend, that alone should have been enough to get him proposed, And but he wasn't.
It's interesting that honor played a massive role in his life.
Yes.
And yet he committed the cardinal sin that no mafioso should do.
Correct.
And dishonored the whole thing. So honor, and then he ended up being one of the biggest dishonorable people in those eyes.
Yes. Now
that it could be.
Correct. But he didn't look at it that way. He looked at it that it was sort of a revenge thing for him. He was getting back at the people who had dishonored him by treating him the way that they did. That's the way, in his mind, he thought about it. And when we wrote the book, and we thought that, in our way of thinking, in normal people's way of thinking, he actually was an honorable guy by coming forward and giving the information to have these bad guys be put in jail. I mean, the pizza connection, if you look in the back of my book, I have the indictment. I was able to get the indictment, and I reprinted it. The page of defendants, the list is about this long, of all of these guys who are in it. So his idea of honor was a kind of really twisted idea of honor. And yes, you're correct. In the mafia way of thinking, he was striving for honor, yet he was one of the most dishonorable people in the mob because of because he came forward and ratted on all these people. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
You're right.
What else is interesting is he treated dishonor by uh, death, by killing
Personal
other people.
dishonor. Personal dishonor or
Yeah, no, he treated so dishonor. So honor meant a lot to him. In dishonor, he hated dishonor, and on many times, which you've outlined, he either killed people, he
yeah.
wanted to kill people, but he was
Right.
prevented from doing so.
It was a
It's
death sentence to him. Being
yeah, it's
dishonorable.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So being dishonorable is a death sentence to him. Yeah, I see that. It's interesting why he went to you guys, and committed dishonor. Why didn't he just use a gun and commit dishonor the way he'd dealt with dishonor before?
I think that, as I said before, this was the ultimate way of getting back at the guys who dishonored him. He. That was the only thing I could possibly imagine that was in his mind when he did that, because shouldn't have been for a mafiosi top of mind. I'm going to go in and become an informant. Although later on in life, when the RICO statute really took hold, then mafiosi were not thinking about taking a gun and going to kill somebody. What they were doing is they walk into the FBI or to the U.S. attorney or to my office and testify against them. That seemed to me to be the best way in their minds to get back at these guys. Also, it was a way of saving their own ass. Now, keep in mind, Rob, Luigi got a deal on a murder that he confessed to. He was going to go to jail for 25 years to life. And he got a deal because he gave us all this information about the things that he did, the dishonorable things that he did. So there was a method to his madness. In addition to, he wouldn't have gotten, he might have gotten caught for the New Corner restaurant, and if he didn't give us information, he would have gone to trial and perhaps been convicted and gone to jail for that, because maybe somebody else would have turned state's evidence, Mirable or somebody else who was involved in the plot. So it was a matter of him getting back at them, and also saving his own ass, in my opinion.
Yeah, okay. No, I don't want to harbour on it for too long, but I find this bit fascinating. Like, I suppose what he could have done he could have absconded to Canada or something like that to save his own skin.
Oh, he could have. He could have.
Yeah, but I'm just thinking
Rob, you can't dismiss his desire for revenge as well.
No, I was just about to say.
Yeah, you can't dismiss that. And this was his way of getting back at the people who he thought dishonored him. Let me just say one other thing.
Yeah.
He would have, if Sindona had given him the 30 grand, he would have been out of the country. He would have been, and that would have been it. But that was yet another, and maybe the most important and most significant dishonor to him, was the fact that Sindona wouldn't give him the money to get out of the country, even though he knew that there was a threat over his head, Sindona that is, that this guy was going to give him up if he didn't give it to him. So,
yeah, of course. But he, because he incriminated himself, didn't he, Luigi? I know you said he might have got in trouble in future, but if he had absconded, then perhaps no one would have found him if it did turn out that you guys found something on him.
Yeah.
I just find it interesting that by doing what he did, he dishonored himself. He must have done in his own eyes. I know you say it's revenge. Whereas perhaps if he took the gun and did some things to people that he thought dishonored him, then perhaps he wouldn't have to live with this dishonor, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I do. I do.
That's just
it's what makes him, in my opinion, makes him a very fascinating character. He really is and just on the surface, the things that he did and the way he did them entertaining in my opinion. But also when you think about what you have been thinking about, you realize that this guy was very complex, and even though on the surface he may have been very simple, but he had a lot going on in that head of his. It may not be the way you and I think. It isn't the way you and I think, but the way he thinks and the way he thought worked out for him. It was his thing until it didn't. Until it
Till it
didn't.
didn't. Yeah. But he got a hell of a touch, though. I know you said he got, he only did a short time in prison, but I guess he didn't know that was going to be the case
Correct.
before. But only Sammy the Bull did crazy stuff and got 5 years in prison, didn't he?
Yep.
And this guy seems to be maybe not quite on Sammy the Bull's level, but certainly with his crimes,
Yeah.
he seemed to be.
I think he
seemed to
got
be lucky
4.
to-
I think it was 4 to 12. He might have got. I think that's what it was, but he didn't come anywhere near doing even the minimum. He was saved by the bell, so to speak. The idea that there was the President's Commission on Organized Crime gave him the idea. That's why you know that this guy had a brain, because he figured out that he can play that card that he was holding all of this time about the pizza connection. When he found out, oh my God, there's actually a hearing on the pizza connection stuff, he knew that was the time to play the card, and he did. And it worked out for him until he couldn't handle witness protection. So
No, that's interesting in itself, isn't it? You got your freedom, but he was more freer in prison by the sound of it than what he was on the outside in his own mind.
No question.
Yeah, amazing. Who was that guy? I've heard him before, actually. I've interviewed. Have you heard the Pontiac brothers from East Harlem?
Did I have him?
Have you heard of them?
No.
Pontiac brothers.
Pontiac?
They're big time.
No,
the Pontiac, but they're big time heroin dealers back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and
that's even before me, Rob. I wasn't.
That's even
Yeah.
That's even before you. Well, I've interviewed the son, Paddy. I think you've been on a show with him before, or he's watched your shows before. One of them, Paddy Melizia.
I probably have watched him, but it was
I know he's watched you.
Yeah.
He met the guy who was the Italian. You mentioned a story of a guy in the Vatican who was robbing these banks.
Sindona,
yeah.
With Michele Sindona.
He met,
right.
Yeah, Sindona. He'd met him in prison while he was visiting his father. But anyway, that's a side point. Sindona. Why did it take the Italian authorities and the US authorities so long to catch this guy?
Good question. He must have been very good at what he did. I think that he had the intimidation factor behind him as well. His job essentially was to money launder for the Gambino family. He was money laundering money for their drug operations. And word had to have been out in Italy, which is where he did all of the banks, where he bankrupted these banks, was in Italy, that this was not a guy to mess around with. And he gets into a little bit of trouble in America. The first thing he does is he goes to look for a hitman to kill both a prosecutor and a judge. So that's not a guy that ordinary people would want to mess with, So he's also another very fascinating character. I read a lot about him when I did the research for the book. And, I think he thought that he was going to be able to live for a long time in jail. But I believe what ultimately happened and what happens to a lot of people like him, that people outside, his superiors or people who he worked with, were afraid that things would become too tough. And what do you do next? Well, you become a witness. So rather than have him become a witness, they decided to just eliminate him. And he was involved in this whole Vatican bank corruption stuff. And that whole thing with their stock certificates and banknotes and all the rest of it. That stuff was being counterfeited and spread and sold all around the world, So he had a lot of people working for him and with him. And I think that they were just not going to mess around with a guy like him. I mean, he was an international financier and an international criminal at the same time. And so
Yeah.
his mistake was coming to Long Island in New York and bankrupting the Franklin National Bank, and that's what allowed the U.S. authorities to get her. So
it was only one bank in America they
one bank in
bankrupted.
America, yeah.
Oh, so the authorities were quick off the mark to get him
Yeah.
then, the
Oh,
US
yeah. In
authorities.
America, it was.
Okay.
Yep. Yep. In Italy, it was all over the place. But I always find it fascinating, the idea that he was doing this in Venice and how the cardinal in Venice was so upset because people were complaining to him and people were losing their money. And then when he becomes the boss, the Pope, and now he's got this guy in his crosshairs, they're not going to take a chance in him shutting them down, and they eliminate her. So it's I always find that to be a fascinating story.
Which is an evil bastard, though, wasn't
Yeah.
he? Robbing like average Joes of their life savings. What a
Correct.
scum move that is.
Yep. Yep.
You say you cared for Luigi the Zip's wife. What happened with his wife? How did you care for her? And did they end up united in the witness protection program?
We cared for them in the sense that she was put into witness protection. She was put into witness protection by the feds and stayed there. The state government has no witness protection program. It's a federal government thing. And if a state witness needs to go into witness protection, then you have to get the marshals and the U.S. government to agree to take them in. So she was put into witness protection by the federal authorities, the U.S. attorney and the federal authorities, way back when he first turned, and stayed, never came out. He was separated from her. He was never, when he came out of Minnesota and went into to testify in front of Congress and then in front of the Pizza Connection trial, he was in witness protection, but not with her. Not with her. He was never together. And I've never understood the reason for that, except that I believe, and this is only speculation, that she didn't want to have anything to do with him anymore. That's what my feeling is. I believe he had by the time he went to witness protection, I think he had 3 kids by that point. They might have been all daughters. And that's my feeling, is that she just never wanted to have anything to do with him after that. But he was very, very protective of her in the beginning. So
that's really interesting. I wonder whether she wanted nothing to do with him because he told, or because of what he was doing.
Because he put her life in danger. Those 2 guys standing outside her house when she was supposed to be under protection by the FBI, I am sure had a very, very strong chilling effect on her.
Yeah, and I imagine that life would have been a lot lonelier for him outside of those prison walls without his wife and his children.
And it was.
Yeah. I couldn't read my handwriting there. You mentioned, this is the last one on Luigi the Zip, but the son of a vicar in the prison you mentioned earlier came and asked Luigi the Zip to arrange the murder of his brother because might know where the bodies are, of where the father, the priest, and the son dumped people, right?
Right.
Am I missing the point here? But if you've got somebody in prison who's, I guess, knowingly been ostracized by the mafia because he's likely to tell on them, isn't it a bit of a dumb move for someone to go to this guy and then say, hey, could you take care of these people on the outside?
Okay, well, first of all, you're giving too much credit to the guy that is asking him to do a hit for her. First, that's number one. Number two, you're assuming that he knew that Luigi how would he know that Luigi was an informant at that point? He wouldn't know that. The only thing he knew is that he was in the protective custody unit because he was a mafia hitman. And that's where mafia hitmen would be put, because others maybe tried to kill him to make themselves much more important in jail. So that was that. So And the idea that this guy would have the wherewithal to say, well, he must be an informant, so let me not go to him. It was exactly the opposite. He went to him because he was a mafia hitman. And Luigi probably gave him some BS about how he was getting out and that, don't worry about it. I got a lot of guys on the outside. They're going to help me, that kind of thing. So that's what that was all about. And but
Yeah.
I confirmed that when it was happening, and I had a guy that he had mentioned, he meaning the kid in jail, had mentioned, who was working for the father. The guy came in and talked to me, and he was a guy who also turned. He became a witness for the people who tried the case. I didn't try it, and it turns out he was a guy who was, when the preacher was killing the girls, these women, he would chop up their bodies and he would burn them in a vat of burning oil in the basement of the church. And then they would take the remnants and drive them to a place, a camp in upstate New York that the preacher and the reverend owned, and bury and dump the stuff into a lake. All of the stuff, the remnants of bodies and things in a lake. When we did the case, we sent divers in and came up with body parts and strung them all together onto a piece of wire. And when the reverend was tested, when he was on trial, he denied doing what he did. And the prosecutor at the time, I was watching it as it has happened, took this, let's call it a bracelet of death, and tossed it to him and said, "You didn't kill it. Well, what's this? We found this on your property upstate." So these were bad people, bad people. And what he used to do, this reverend, was send out, he'd recruit these young women, promised them the world, give them a home. Most of them were people who had problems at home, etc. Gave them a place to live, had sex with them. He must have fathered about 45 kids. And then if any of them gave him a hard time, he would just simply kill them, take them down to the basement, take the body down, have this guy who worked, he recruited a guy who used to work in the morgue, at the medical examiner's office, cut the body up, and then burn it in this vat of oil. And the guy said to me, he said, "Mike, when I was doing that and those body parts were in there burning," he said, "it looked like I was frying chicken."
Yeah,
The
that's gross.
depravity, Rob. I mean,
Yeah.
man's inhumanity to his fellow man is just beyond comprehension.
No, that's,
So when when this guy approached Luigi, and now we were able to maybe get more information about others in his family who may have been doing this, we took it, and Luigi was our person. What this guy was concerned about was that his brother, who hadn't been arrested, was going to give up information as to where these bodies were buried. I think I said that before. And while we're doing this, one day I'm in my office, and the detective on the front desk in the DA's office says, "There's a guy out here to see you." I said, "Who is it?" It was the brother. The brother had heard about that people were looking for him. He came in and became a witness for me and told me all kinds of stuff later on. So, strange
and
bedfellow.
I,
Yes.
oh, totally. And I suppose that guy, like, the the son who approached Luigi was, I guess Luigi wouldn't have gone around telling people that he was an informant
No,
if it
absolutely
wasn't an
not.
act.
No.
Yeah,
He
so
told him just the
he,
opposite. "Yeah, I can take care of this for you. Don't worry. I'll be out. I'm in here on," he probably told me he was in here on some bullshit thing. "I'll be out in no time." So,
no,
yeah.
brilliant. Thank you for explaining that. It was great. Um, it's been almost 2.25 hours. You've done almost all the talking. Are you happy to carry on, or should we do a part 3?
I would like to do a part 3 if you don't mind. I just have something that I need to take care of tonight, and if I run much longer, I'm going to be late for that. So if we could look, I love talking to you, Rob, and I'd be happy to come back and do a part 3. Save all your questions about Crooked Brooklyn and the rest, because there are lots of good cases, and the dentist. We haven't even touched on the dentist who stole bones and tissue out of people's bodies. So
I think we covered that one on the first one.
we did. Did we talk about that?
I think we did. I will
Okay,
go and
well,
double check it.
if we did,
I'll
then we won't do it again. But there are a lot of
okay.
good stories in that, and I never even told you the story that one of my first my first connections, I shouldn't say connections, or cases against mobsters. There's one that happened early in my career, and then later on, when I became chief of rackets, I had another case involving a mobster, and it's a good story about how myself, and another detective, the detective who had the case, solved it, and it's kind of an interesting thing. So, so
I
there's
look forward to
more to
hearing
talk
that.
about. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, great stuff. Okay, well, offline we'll arrange a part 3 if that's okay, and I'll let you get on and
It's
enjoy your evening.
it's more than okay, and you should be going to bed. You don't feel well, you said, right? So, what
No, it's
time is it for you?
almost
It's
it's
11 o'clock.
almost 11 o'clock. Yeah, and it is dark here now.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, cool.
Bright and sunny
What's
here
it?
still. So,
Bright and sunny,
well,
lovely.
thank you
No,
very
but
much, Rob, for having me. I really enjoyed talking to you, and I'd be happy to come back for a part 3 if you'll have me.
thank you very much, Michael. Of course, we'll have you, and I really appreciate your time and enjoy talking with you too.
Thank you, sir. Take care.
All right.
Bye bye.
Until next time, see ya.
See ya.
Cheers.